Hyundai's N division has been around for a relatively short period of time, but in that time they've put together some pretty fun and compelling products that consumers have both very much enjoyed and also been somewhat unaware of. But as the N division has grown and as consumers have very much enjoyed those products, the next step forward had to be a significant leap. And they have certainly made that with the Hyundai Ioniq 5N, their first electric entrant into the N division. And as far as I'm aware, this is both the loudest and quietest statement they could have possibly made. Now this car screams sleeper. So what's the big deal? And is it an N car? Is it a performance vehicle? Today I'm here at Laguna Seca Raceway to take a look at the Ioniq 5N to tell you whether or not you should consider it for your next performance car, not just your next electric car. One of the biggest indicators into how hot this might be is going to be how open this front end is. In a standard Ioniq 5, you're going to have your aero shutters located right about here, and those are going to open and close as necessary. What you don't find is a whole lot open beyond that, because in most electric cars, the focus is on efficiency, so aerodynamic drag and wind resistance are the enemy. But because they don't need nearly as much cooling, they're able to get away with it. The fact that this section here is completely wide open and that these grill slots are actually open here towards the middle as well means that this gets a whole heck more of a lot cooling than we get in the standard Ioniq 5. And presumably there's a reason for that. And I can tell you that it's not just cooling the battery that's happening, it's also cooling the motors. And it's the cooling required to keep this thing fast charging at a reasonable rate. When you are doing track sessions on, charging sessions off, track sessions on, and charging sessions off. And that's one of the things that this is intended to do, because this is a little bit more racetrack ready, I think, than some of the other N lineup has been, but it's a little bit more challenging because this is electric. And electric can't go on a racetrack, right? While the overall dimensions and the silhouette are going to seem very similar, there are going to be some distinct differences, but you're going to have to look a little bit closer. Here at the front, there's an inlet that you're not going to find on the 5 because the N needs more cooling, specifically brake cooling for that particular inlet. And if you look down here at the brakes, these brakes are a heck of a lot bigger than you find on not just the 5, but most vehicles, because this is still a relatively heavy car and it needs to stop as quickly as possible repeatedly. Now, to help that, we have the inlet, we have the larger wheels, but we also have larger tires. A significantly wider tire than we find on the 5 because the N is about performance. We need grip, we need contact, and that's why we need this extended wheel arch to be able to fit that wheel and tire combination where the much smaller combination used to live. Along the side here, we'll see a lot less detailing, and that's going to be because we don't need those details. We need it to look good, but we also need to make sense. It doesn't make sense to put paneling on that doesn't match the rest of the vehicle anymore, nor has a specific function. And the next function we find is another air inlet here at the rear wheel arch. Again, same idea, we are looking to cool those brakes. But another fun fact for the brake cooling is that this car is going to use its brakes a lot less than most cars on track because it has a significant boost in regenerative braking capability. But we'll talk about that more when we get in the car and have some more time behind the wheel. The last visual piece that you can see from this side is going to happen up here at the spoiler. And on the Ioniq 5, the spoiler is there and it exists, but it exists to make the car a little more slippery. In this case, the whole intent is to push this car down, to get more downforce, to get better track times, and while it is going to hurt the efficiency, that's not the sole motivator for this Ioniq 5N. Here at the back, we'll start from the top and work our way down, meaning we're going to start here with the spoiler, which is definitely a different design than you find on the standard Ioniq 5, but that's part of the aerodynamic package that's been applied to this vehicle to give it just that much more downforce. This is not some enormously large rear spoiler, and actually what they've done is gone with a two-tone look to make it maybe seem a little bit smaller than it is, because we get the color here on the front portion, and on the rear portion it turns to black, which is going to blend in a little bit better with the rear window. Overall, love the design, especially because it includes this triangular rear third brake light. Now, beneath it, normally we would find in a top-end trim of an Ioniq 5, the rear view camera mirror. We don't find that here, and I don't suspect we'll see that anytime soon. We do still have the wiper blade. If you find yourself needing this because you are doing some performance driving in challenging conditions and visibility is a little bit tight, then it doesn't hurt to have that rear wiper, but it is something that could have been deleted that overall I'm pretty glad that it wasn't. If we move a little bit farther down here, Where we had the front end with the light bar and the pixelated lights, we have the similar design on the rear, but instead of white, obviously we have our red pixelated lights. And as you can see over here, when it is our turn signal, it illuminates the entire rectangle, not just the outside. I think that's beautifully well done. It's integrated, it's subtle, it is red, so folks who like their amber are going to be missing out on here. But overall, I'm pleasantly surprised. Moving farther down, we have a pretty good copy paste of what we saw at the front of the vehicle. A strong, prominent light bar, but on the edges, we obviously don't have our white headlights, we have our red brake lights, and if we are using them as a full brake light or your turn signal, you're going to see the whole rectangle illuminate, not just the outer edges. Slightly inward of that, you'll find 4 squares that look a little bit different than the rest here in the middle, and those are going to be your reverse lights. Very well integrated, very subtle. What's a little less subtle is the badging, because this is a performance car. Performance cars need to have something a little bit different, and the black badging is a pretty common way to do so. So we have the black Hyundai here, we have Ioniq 5 in black. This one blends in a little bit more, and I think it's very subtly done. Definitely enjoy it. But instead of having the black accent line that we would find on the standard model, we have the orange accent that you find throughout the rest of the vehicle. And the next place you find that is going to be down here, which I think is, at a glance, one of the easiest ways to tell that this is the performance model. When we take this vehicle away from the track, chances are that this is also probably your daily driver. And because we have a mid-sized crossover design, we get all the functionality that comes with it, and the practicality as well. We have a hatch that I can fit under when it's standing at its highest height. I can also reach just about everything in here, and with these seats up, we have tons of storage space, especially for your daily needs. If you wanted to pack in more, there are ways to do it. But if we wanted just that much more, we can always fold down those rear seats, which fold down almost all the way flat. And just a unique piece that I haven't seen in a whole lot of other vehicles is that they will actually lock down in place instead of simply lay flat and hope they stay there. With all of this, if you did want to take this to the track, I would not be surprised if you could fit a full set of tires in here. And depending on how long you're there and whether or not they have charging at that racetrack, you might be able to go through a full set of tires or have your street tires and your race tires. But either way, you can be your own support car. Moving inside the car, we're going to see a pretty tame interior. By and large, this is mostly black with a soft padded armrest area. We see some blue stitching above and down below with this race flag checkered blue pattern that is going to match that stitching. Down below, you'll find the Bose speaker grille outlined with a light blue light. It is hard to capture, but it is down there. Up into the rest of the dashboard, we find some more blue stitching, just a single line up at the very top here, a soft padded area at the very top, a little bit of padding down below, and we have our glove box, which should be very much the same as you would find in the standard Ioniq 5. You'll also see some of the striping or striations in the interior that have carried over from that other model. Not a whole lot has been done here in the best way, I think, to make this a whole world different than you'll find in the standard vehicle. Moving over to the steering wheel, you will find more differentiation between the standard model and the performance model. One of those big changes is going to be the N logo here. Like I said, you'll find it in the vehicle, but not everywhere. You'll have the N button down below, left and right. And then above that, on the top left, you'll have your drive mode selector, which would have normally lived down here, and the NGB, which is going to be your boost. And that boost is going to be something that you may not ever really be able to use except for merging on the freeway before you get yourself in a whole lot of trouble. Either way, it is there, and you will still find the functions that you need or expect to have on this vehicle. So because this is an everyday car, you do have your adaptive cruise control and your steering assist. This does have the latest steering system from Hyundai. And on the right side, you'll have the favorites button, which you can program to just about whatever you need it to be, voice commands, different modes, and your call and hang up button. You have a scroll wheel here for your volume and a clicker for your different mode settings. When you click those N mode buttons, you'll see here on the display tucked behind that there are a number of things that can change. In the very top left, we go from N to custom 1, so we can make some changes there. And if we press on the right side, we'll see a change in our display. So we move over to, ironically, a digital tachometer for a vehicle that doesn't really rev the same way you might expect. However, if we do rev it, we do get a digitized version of an internal combustion engine, and honestly, it doesn't sound too bad. You're just not likely to use this on a consistent basis. Press the button again and it will go back to normal. And this is going to be one of the things we see here is your level 3, because we have the same ability to do regenerative braking, but in this particular model, the regenerative braking is significantly more powerful. The screen layout here is a familiar one, but one difference is that the surround between these two screens is black instead of white. And from what I can tell, this is the only way to get a black surround. And one of the things I don't particularly love about the Ioniq 5 is going to be that white surround. So I'm not saying it's worth paying the extra for the black surround. I'm just saying it is in the parts catalog, and I wouldn't mind if it made its way to the non-performance model. The large screen over here is going to be your home base for just about everything you need, and for most folks that's going to mean your Android Auto or Apple CarPlay. All of that is still here, and we can go into our N mode and see all of the different changes that we are able to make. If we go up close here, you can see there's a custom 1 and a custom 2. You can make changes to the motors, steering, suspension. All of these different components can be adjusted, and if we go off to the right here, you can see that you have a G meter as well as your different forces being measured and displayed for you. All of this makes sense. This is the performance car. You would want to be able to track that. You'll also find all of the main functions that you would get in the standard Ioniq 5, and there's no reason not to have those functions built in here. This is really just an add, not hardly a takeaway to be found. You can do some more playing here if you want to adjust things like your torque distribution, make it more rear wheel drive or front wheel drive biased. You also have a drift optimizer, a race mode, the N pedal, which is going to be part of that enhanced regenerative braking that comes with this. All of these things are set, including your lap timer. So quite a range of features built into the vehicle and available for you right out the gate. Moving below this main screen, we're going to have the top button bank here be related to that top screen, and the lower portion here being dedicated mostly to your climate control functions. If you do want to do things like change your heated or cooled seating, it does require a press of this button and then moving up to the screen to go ahead and activate those functions. I do wish that was a button, but overall the functions are still there, and having cooled seats in essentially your race car is never a bad thing. Though if you want the best lap time, I'm guessing you'll either turn that off or say that you didn't go faster because it happened to be on. If we move farther down, we're actually going to see a different design than we find in that standard model. And that's because this does have some different drivetrain components, and that is going to change some of the layout here of the interior. So instead of having this large floating area down below, they've actually pushed things to be a little bit more built into place. And the way this is all laid out, I think, is totally reasonable. We have a Qi wireless charger right here. We still have our Android Auto Apple CarPlay connection, and that is adjustable here with a button. And then you do have an extra outlet for power for your passenger. Down below, you'll find another power outlet and the cigarette style outlet. And then we find the cup holders, which are the unique design cup holders, so they can either be a cup holder or a larger open area. There's not a whole lot of room under here, probably 4 or 5 inches or so, but this space is slightly different than the Ioniq 5. We do still have a little cubby area, but again, just a slightly different layout. One thing you may notice is that if you look above you, there is no glass. So no moonroof, no pano roof, just a solid fixed roof. That makes a lot of sense for a performance car. It is just one of the few things you've had to sacrifice if this is the direction that you wanted to go. One of the largest and most impactful differences on the interior is going to be the seating. If you have an N product already, then this is going to look familiar because we have the N sport seats built in here. They are heated, they are ventilated, but what they aren't is powered. So it is a manual up and down, it is a manual recline, and there is no lumbar support. Just below the headrest, we have the N logo as well as cutouts for a 5-point safety harness, but these seats are going for the look more than the function, as I don't believe they are set up to work with that safety harness. In the back seats, we'll find a similar door design as we did up front, but we will see a difference in the seats just because these ones are not changed to performance seats where the front ones are. They are going to be a multi-textured surface, so we have our leather type material here and more of a cloth. And the new end seats that we get for the front are not really going to cut into that rear legroom at all. If anything, it might actually add just a hair, so something to consider there. We do have a fold down armrest because, again, this is meant to do a little bit of everything. It's your all-in-one, and you get all the functionality of the Ioniq 5 with the performance of the N brand. Now, one of the first things you may notice is that this car has a soundtrack, and that's definitely unusual in the world of electric vehicles, where one of the whole points is having a quiet driving experience. But there are a couple reasons why you might not want a quiet drive. Some of it might be because you love the sound of an engine, and I don't blame you for that in the slightest. The sound of a good engine is certainly something I enjoy. And the other thing you might notice is that this engine is actually shifting. And as a reminder, this is an electric car, so it doesn't have a transmission in the traditional sense. But Hyundai has gone well above and beyond the mandate to build an interesting electric vehicle. They've gone ahead and built a really fun one. The sound is part of the experience, but the shifting feels so genuine. And even if it doesn't make this car faster, because chances are it makes it slower, it's still an absolute hoot. And this car is supposed to be fun. Maybe there's two different types of performance, pure performance and for the fun of it. But I'll tell you what, this car is absolutely for the fun of it. Out here on a track like this, you can push just about as hard as you want, and this car is ready to go for you. That doesn't mean you can't overcook it. But this is not some Tesla with sticky tires on it. This is a genuine performance machine. And if you're curious what that sounds like, well, it's sort of the electric equivalent. Very much what you would find in a movie soundtrack. And for those who want to embrace the fact that this is an electric vehicle, by all means, turn on Evolution and enjoy the experience, because it's still a whole lot of fun. And one of the biggest things that this does for you is that it gives you an indicator of how fast you're going, especially when you're in the shift mode. Driving on track is not a time you want to spend a lot of your time looking at the dashboard to see what speed you're going, and obviously because it's not a car, you're not looking for gears. But if you don't have a speed indicator right in front of you, and most people don't, what we normally use to indicate how fast we're going is the sound of the engine, and that engine sound doesn't exist until you add it. If you want to go beyond Evolution, you can move to Supersonic, and this is going to sound like a jet fighter. And so far of the three available, I think this is probably the most interesting to me, because the Evolution seems a bit forced, and the ignition is a sound we know, but we then know that it's not quite that sound. The Supersonic, however, is just foreign enough to be interesting and not feel quite as simulated. Please excuse the head cold, but I want to make sure I had all the numbers in one spot for all of you stat hounds out there. And since there are a number of new or improved technologies here in the Ioniq 5N, I wanted to make sure we didn't skip any of the main ones. We'll start with the battery pack, where we have a 77.4 kilowatt hour battery in the longest range Ioniq 5, up to an 84 kilowatt hour battery here in the Ioniq 5N. And this battery is also more energy dense than that of the older battery pack, meaning we're able to get more power out of it at any given moment. That's going to be one of the key components in getting this Ioniq 5N up to a total horsepower output of 601 horsepower, and that's without using the N Grin Boost button, which is going to get us 10-second bursts of 641 total horsepower output. That boost function does have about a 10-second cooldown period before you're able to activate it again, but all of that is made possible by the new two-stage inverter that we find in this Ioniq 5N. There are a number of different ways to measure performance, and around the track, obviously the faster it is, the higher performance it is. But very rarely are you going to be able to take your 5N on the track. And so one of the ways you'll see it in everyday driving is in the 0 to 60 time, which has a manufacturer quote of 3.25 seconds. But there were a number of journalists out there at Laguna Seca that were able to get just below that, some as low as 3.1. Now, I don't have to tell you that 3.1 seconds 0 to 60 is a phenomenal time. But one of the party tricks of electric vehicles has been that instant torque, meaning 0 to 60 acceleration has come down quite rapidly in the different segments that electric vehicles compete in. But here in the Ioniq 5N, this is hardly a one-trick pony, because we see a lot of other changes that start right from the chassis. While it's the same shape and design as the standard chassis, there have been a number of improvements to increase the stiffness and torsional rigidity, and you're going to feel those changes on the road, on the track, or at your local autocross event. This suspension is really designed for performance, and one of the most surefire ways to tell is that Hyundai has removed one of the more efficient components, which is the front axle disconnect that we found in the standard Ioniq 5, to integrate a much simpler, more robust suspension system here in the 5N. And again, that just goes to show that performance was the key, but you will see that in the total overall efficiency. Not only does this car come with a lot more power, but it comes with larger, stickier tires, and therefore we see a sharp decline in the overall efficiency, meaning that new 84 kilowatt hour battery is only going to give us 220 miles of driving range, which, as far as I'm concerned, is still enough for most people's day-to-day lives. And like anyone who has a performance vehicle knows, there are always going to be sacrifices made for that next tenth of performance. Very few compromises really are made between the 5N and the Ioniq 5 in terms of daily driving, because we still get all 5 seats, all the storage capacity, and because of this new suspension, the fact that it's adjustable means that you don't have a track focus back-braking suspension on your day-to-day commute, and that's going to make this much more feasible for folks who want to take their daily driver and turn it up to 11. And for folks that are all about bang for the buck, you're going to have a hard time finding a more complete package than that of the Ioniq 5N. Considering that this car starts at $67,475 delivered, you are getting a ton of technology, a ton of practicality, and a very versatile machine that you really need to step into the six figures almost immediately to find a competitive option. And the first vehicle that comes to mind for me is the Porsche Taycan, which again starts significantly higher than that $67,500 base price and goes quite a bit higher from there. If you want to double or triple the price of that Ioniq 5N, you most certainly can. And the difference in performance is going to be somewhat negligible. And depending on how good you are of a driver on that racetrack, you might not be able to get more out of the Taycan than you could in the 5N. One of the only downsides is that when you order your Ioniq 5N, you really only get to select which color you want. And while they have some grayscale, there are some compelling color options. But either way, if you want to customize your vehicle, then that Porsche Taycan is going to be a much more attractive option as long as you're willing to pay for it.